Hey, everybody, welcome to the Real Hype, Real Results podcast. Hey, this is episode number 1. Adam, we've been doing some stuff for a long time, and this is going to be fun, and this is your brainchild. So I want to know, like, for the listeners, why this particular podcast?
Yeah, thanks, Gary, and it has been a fun ride so far, and we hope to continue it for many years to come.
Yeah.
You know, I think in 20 years of being a CPA really the concierge or consigliere, the term that I'm trying to get to from The Godfather there.
Oh, there you go.
For a small business owner, which in our world is going to be anywhere from, 10 employees up to 1,000 employees. This is our definition of small business owner. You see a lot of stuff in terms of patterns that emerge that, geez, if I just would have done this different, or if I just would have done this different, what a better outcome I might have had. And I think at the same time, the people that we work with are typically pretty hungry for, knowledge. They want to improve.
Mm-hmm.
They read a lot of business books, listen to a lot of coaches. But the problem is it's very hard to take what's in the book and think about how I'm going to practically implement it.
Yeah.
And that's not the hype, that's not to knock any, there are a lot of fabulous business books that are out there, a lot of fabulous advisors that are out there, but at the same time, taking that down into a practical set of actions that I can measure is just difficult because, if you read something on culture, for example, like intuitively we know we should improve culture. Yeah. But then how would I actually measure that? Because culture is a lot of work, walk me through, Gary, how's that going to translate back to the bottom line? So I think really the reason that I wanted to start this podcast, which is embedded in the name, is let's take a lot of these really great ideas. Yeah. Talk about how you might practically implement. So we're not going to create a whole bunch of new stuff here, but let's talk about how you can practically implement ideas that are out there in your business and in your life and actually have that show up as a tangible. And when I say tangible, some people would say, well, Gary's a happier person and he stayed with the company longer. That is tangible. Like I can see it, but in our world, tangible means money in the bank account.
Right.
So how do we take some really great ideas and have those translate into a real result that you actually see flow through your financial statements? Because as a business owner, that's your ultimate scorecard. You don't really have any other scorecard but that one, in terms of one that really matters at the end of the day. Yeah.
Without numbers and dollars in the bank, it's a great idea and it's a hobby.
Right.
But, and there's a lot on the line when you're talking about people's families. It's your family as a solopreneur, but when you start having more, that responsibility and that weight gets pretty heavy.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah. So thank you for doing that. And I love your vision for it. You wrote this ebook called The Stormproof Business. Now, here's what's interesting. So the tagline or the subhead is the blueprint for creating a business built to last any conditions. You and I both know we've seen downturns, we've seen upswings, we've seen pandemics, we've seen all kinds of stuff. We see cash flow challenges when you're growing, all of those kind of things. We also see complacency, and then all of a sudden things slowly they start slipping. So storms come. I want to hear a little bit more about the specific why behind this particular ebook.
Yeah. So first off, I like sailing. My son is also a pilot. And I think the analogy in both holds true that, good sailors aren't made in good weather. They're made in bad weather. So like with my, I have a sailboat. I love sailing. And when the wind is 10 knots, while that may be perfect sailing condition, that's not when I want to go. When I want to go, by myself. Like if I'm going to take my wife out, we're going out in 7 to 10 knots because she doesn't want the boat to heel over beyond 10 degrees.
Right.
When I want to go out by myself, it's when I know that I can get into trouble, not because I thrive on trouble, but more like I just want to know what to do. You know, I want to know what to do in terms of if trouble comes up. So for me, it's more like 20 knots and above is when I want to go out, because I know that something's going to happen that's going to need me to be better prepared. So, you know, using that as an example, I'm going to go out with less sail. So I have less power on the boat so that I know that I can take the boat out and keep it under control, regardless of the wind condition, knowing that I may get gusts up to 30 or 35 degrees. So when it comes to this particular ebook and topic, you know, while there have been pandemics and recessions and things like that, at the same time, for the most part, you know, we're doing this in February of 2026, and we've been on a historic bull run in general. You know, so in general, things have gone up. So there's not a whole lot of management experience of dealing with true downturns or economic cycles. I mean, they've been predicting a recession now for years, and there actually has not been a true economic recession in the classic sense in 07, 08. I mean, we had one during the pandemic, but it wasn't like that was a pandemic. You know, you can't really say that that was due to a classic economic cycle. So there's just not a lot of experience about what to do when, you know, when the winds are blowing. So what I thought would be helpful, yet at the same time, you know, people feel like the wind is going to blow. You know, what do I need to do to be prepared? So when I started thinking about what are the subjects that I would cover, if I was to write the How to Sail in Any Condition book, but for a business owner, what would be the things that I would want to cover? The topics that we cover in this ebook are the things that come to mind in terms of the foundational preparation things that as long as I have these covered, everything should be fine. And what I'd also say is that the converse is true, that if I don't do one of them, at some point, it's going to bite me in the butt. You know, without fail, when I just think through this, you know, we thought through the list pretty hard, you know, now is this going to solve every problem that you have? No. But at the same time, if I don't do something, it's going to come up someday, you know, in other words, like it's the equivalent of ignoring a chronic health condition, you know, and then next thing you know, you find out you're a type 1 diabetic. You know, or, you know, you ignore that little stomach pain and next thing you know, your appendix explodes. You know, so that these things represent those basic foundational items that again, you know, there's nothing new in the ebook, but what I've also found is a struggle out there with business books and coaching advice is nobody gives you a particular set of steps that you should follow to make sure that you're kind of, you know, whereas in a house, you know, you're not going to build the roof before you poured the foundation.
Right.
But in a business, a lot of times people built the roof and there is no foundation. You know, like, look at my fabulous house. And it's like, you know, the proverbial, it's built on a house, you know, on sand. It's like, I mean, literally like your footings are, you know, put in with a, you know, 16-ounce hammer. Like, you know, of course that's not going to, you know, survive any condition.
Yeah. I just saw a headline recently of a big multi-story building in San Francisco where it's got like an 18-inch drop already. Like the Leaning Tower of Pisa is not a good thing, you know, and that's not, I mean, that's a great visual. That's the last thing that you want to do is build a business like the Leaning Tower of Pisa.
Yeah, that's right.
Because the higher you go, the faster that thing's going to topple. Yeah, let's talk about some of the basics on the foundations then, man. Let's just dive in.
Yeah. So the first one is cash reserve, you know, making sure that you've got some kind of a savings account established. And that, you know, anybody listening could say, duh, you know, of course I do. But then people ignore the advice.
Yeah.
So what, and again, you also, as a justification for not having one, I'm trying to think of this. There's like a famous story out there. I can't remember the company name, but it's like, hey, they were down to their last $100 and they went to Las Vegas, bet it on the roulette table, won, and then all of a sudden it's a business. I don't think it was Microsoft, but it was like
Wow.
something of equivalent side. Like
I don't know that I'd recommend that one.
Yeah, everybody's got like the one story of like, hey, we bet the farm on the last dollar that we had in the cupboard. But the point of the cash reserve, and by cash reserve, we talk about cash reserves a couple times in the ebook. When I'm talking about cash reserve here, I'm talking about like basic one payroll in the bank cash reserve.
Yeah.
Just real basic one payroll in the bank. Whatever you need to do to have the access to that. As an operating company, I mean, if you're a startup, you obviously need to have enough money to finance getting through to having revenue. But
yeah,
if you're already, in operations, having at least access to one payroll in the bank, is a big deal. And whether it's in the bank, that obviously would be the most preferable, is it's cash sitting in your bank account at all times. The second is, having a bank line of credit. So like having somebody that can access to it.
Yeah.
The third option would be, hey, I have it available personally, and I have it on deck personally, whether that's, through an investment account or whatever, that I can loan it back in the company. That's another option. Another option would be, could I tap into a home equity line of credit, on my house? I've got availability on that, if I need it. And then, credit cards, making sure that I've got credit card. Look, I'm not going to lie. I actually have financed a partial payroll on a credit card before. Then the last option would be, hey, friends and family last, just because if you can't pay them back, it just starts to get awkward. If you can't meet your obligations on the payback time frame, it just starts to get awkward. But having, just knowing that that's there, is really important. And the thing is, like, when you don't, again, that can sound like a duh. And then people may listen to this and then not follow the advice. But it's sort of like when you're in a bad relationship and then you get out of the bad relationship, all of a sudden you don't realize how much of a tax and an emotional trauma that being in the bad relationship caused. Not having just a bare basic cash reserve available, again, we define it as one payroll in the bank, or availability to one payroll. It's like this cloud that hangs over your head that causes you to have fear and uncertainty, and you're not going to make great decisions. It just ends up being like this pervasive negative theme that runs through your life. And I mean, you can kind of apply that back to the personal level too, where, hey, the same thing applies. Have a month to 3 months of your pay, sitting in a savings account. Like what it, like anybody that's lived paycheck to paycheck knows what that feels like, to live paycheck to paycheck. Like, you're doing it, you're making it work, but it's always this cloud that hangs over your head that when you don't have to live that way anymore, it's sort of an unbelievable weight gets lifted off your shoulders. And now all of a sudden you're kind of living up to your real potential. So with this one, I feel pretty strongly that until you remove the cloud, it's hard to focus on anything else credibly. And as tempting as it is to say, like, hey, Gary, this great new thing that's going to cost a little bit of money is going to generate so much in sales, and And you think, oh, that's going to be the way that I build, my cash reserve is I'm going to grow my way into my cash reserve. It just, it rarely works
Mm-hmm.
because you can't commit your all to it. I mean, it's sort of like if I'm morbidly obese, it's sort of like reading the magazine that says body recomposition, build muscle and lose fat at the same time. It's like, while that's theoretically possible, it's very difficult.
Yeah.
You are far better off focusing on the thing that's going to kill you the fastest, which in this case is morbid obesity.
Right.
Not, I'm not up to my genetic potential and muscle mass. Not that you shouldn't lift weights. I'm just saying
Right.
that should not be your primary emphasis. Your primary emphasis should be cleaning up your diet. And I think that the cash thing is the same thing for a business that, you've got a massive problem
Yeah.
that is pervasive that you need to address. And as painful as it is to maybe forego some opportunities, it's sort of like, well, then I'm not going to eat the candy bar tonight. You know, it just, put in the discipline to create the savings account by foregoing some expenses, until you got it, like whatever that savings plan needs to look like. That's really what you gotta commit to. And when it comes to, hey, are we going to, make other shiny nickel decisions or investments that are going to cause us to have lower than this cash reserve? It's like, you kind of do that at your own peril, because it means that all of a sudden now fear is going to come back in.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think if I go back again to, don't worry, Gary, I can handle it. I've lived like this before. It's like, well, you just don't know what it's like to not live that way.
Right.
To know what's possible. So that's a lot of soapboxing on it, but that's why, again, everybody says have some cash, but I thought it'd be really useful to say that actually has to come first, because if you don't have that, then everything else is just going to be really difficult to focus on, because you're always going to have this fear and panic in the background that's going to influence your decision making, and somehow it's going to creep in. Hey, what do you want to do for the Christmas party? I don't know. It's a year of austerity. Like it, like all of a sudden now you got a morale issue. It's like, it versus I got the payroll in the bank. Oh, we're gonna have a great Christmas party. Employee morale is up.
Yeah.
So that's you know what that feels like.
Absolutely. We've been there many times, and not just here. I mean, every other company I've run, we've had those moments, right? And so I think you said something that I think is really important, and that is, mindset really matters, because fear-based decisions, unless you're getting chased by a bear, are really not your best. You're not going to think the most clearly. You're going to panic and a lot of times miss the mark. So let's talk about, before we move on to taxes and some of one thing that you didn't mention that I thought probably worth mentioning is there are 401k opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times people don't realize, well, what's that like? And what could qualify so that I don't get a big penalty in dipping into a 401k reserve if I need to?
Yeah, no, it's a source. I didn't put it in the ebook. It's a source only because, like, when you get to a certain size, because there's a dollar limit associated with the amount that you can borrow, it's just limited. But it is a very viable option, in terms of, borrowing from your retirement if you need it. So I think the way that I would think about that, Gary, would be, it may be that I have to bolt together 3 of these sources.
Right.
To ensure that I have the cash reserve, not just one source. And I definitely would throw borrowing against a 401k plan into the mix, if you're kind of down at that. When I say down, I don't mean it in a derogatory way. If that's what it takes, that's what it takes. And I think you're very specifically saying, a loan versus like, I cashed it out and I'll put it back in.
Right.
While you can do that within certain windows of time, this is literally just setting up a loan against your 401k and then having a payback schedule,
Yeah.
associated with it.
Yeah. The other thing that, and I just talked with a prospect this week where they are buying a company. They've been judicious and they've saved, and they're going to be able to buy this thing at a really good rate. They've saved and they're going to actually buy it for cash. Cool. But they need a line of credit to be established, and they don't have a banking relationship. And he was talking about a big behemoth bank. And this is a smaller business, right? I mean, it was through a business broker that he bought this company. So I'm thinking, oh man, I'm not sure, like that's the best option for you, because there are some really good white glove service kind of banks out there. What do you recommend when you're counseling somebody on looking for in a banking relationship? And it changes by industry. I get that. And cash flow needs, or, if you're lockbox kind of things, or you've got international exchange things, those things matter. But what would be some of the practical advice that you would give somebody looking for a banking relationship?
Yeah, it's a great question, Gary. Because it's going to get back to, having money in the account. Like I remember very vividly, one of my very first bankers. I haven't touched base with him in a long time, but his name is Thomas Eatman, and I was, down to needing to make the payroll. We were first starting out, panicked about like, geez, I don't know what I'm going to do. And I think at the time our line of credit was $50,000 and I needed it to go up to 100. And I met with him and I'm like, Thomas, like I'm feeling like shame and guilt, waves of like, feel like the worst person in the world, and we're growing, so it's like, it's not like the business is doing bad. I'm like, really need to go from 50 to 100. Is that going to be an issue? He's like, yeah, I'll have it in your account tomorrow.
Wow.
So the punchline to that story is that if you think about it from a bigger picture level, you can almost sort of put the bank size in terms of your credit need size. So if you need, less than $2 million, small local bank.
Yeah.
While other banks could do it, that's really where you're going to get your best bang for the buck. Kind of that 2 million to probably 50 million. That's going to be, still kind of more localish flavor, but maybe has a couple state footprint. Is going to fit your needs. North of 50 million, you're starting to hit into a regional bank category, or like a lower tier national bank. And, really when you're starting to get to, 100, 200 million and above, that's when a Bank of America or a JP Morgan Chase is going to make sense. Now, a lot of those big banks will drop down and talk to you about how air quote sophisticated they are, but they're not going to make sense because it ultimately just comes down to, they're not going to care about you enough, when you need them the most. So I think if you use those parameters as general guidelines, because everything else in terms of a lockbox or international needs, I mean, you can kind of figure out your way around those.
Yeah.
So when we think about bankers, we think primarily around who's going to loan me the money. That's the primary need. Those thresholds are going to, work pretty well for the most part. I think the second thing that you want to try to figure out is who makes the decisions.
Right on.
So in a smaller bank, ironically, the person that you're meeting for lunch oftentimes has the ability to make the decision. Whereas in the bigger bank, at a Bank of America, when they're meeting you for lunch, they don't actually have the ability to make the decision when it's the same dollar amount. So you may find that the guy that you met with for lunch, the gal that you met with for lunch, they call it the pen, has a $500,000 pen. That may be all you need. You're just having lunch with the person. Whereas, and you can kind of tell your story, they'll go to bat for you. Whereas the bigger bank may have no ability to do anything without secondary or third approval from some guy behind the scenes that you never met it didn't have the ability to make an influence on. So I think the second most important, once you kind of isolate down to, okay, which kind of bank do I need to deal with? Understanding how much authority the person you're dealing with has. And if they don't have the authority that you need, who does? And how do you meet them live?
Yeah.
So you have the opportunity to tell your story. That, that matters. And where that matters
Yes.
even further is like eventually, sometimes they have to take these to broader committees or they have to take them to a board if it's a certain size, depending on the bank side. It's like you just want as many advocates on your side as you can possibly get, making your case to the people who ultimately have the ability to say yes or no. And ideally, you want to be directly with them. But in the event that you can't, you want to know that you've established already a relationship with a bunch of people. In other words, if you're my banker, Gary, and you have a track record of, $100 grand, $250 grand, $500,000, and to go above 500, I now have to go to committee. You've already told me yes 3 times. So you're already invested,
Right.
in the relationship. So I know that you're probably going to go to bat for me because you don't want to look stupid to the credit committee. And you also don't want to look stupid to me by having to tell me no.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's really important. And having worked in 2 big Fortune 100 companies that were banks, I know the spiel, but I also know the churn, well, we've got all these great systems. Well, I think that's kind of cost of entry anymore. You've got to have cybersecurity. You've got to have a lot of these systems, but you mentioned relationship and authority. So you can have great relationship manager in these big companies, which is great. And you may even have longevity there, but if you don't have the authority to make the decision, then what happens is, hey, we had a really great lunch and we, I raced it up, but the credit committee has said not now.
Right. Right.
Somebody else's problem. Somebody else gets the blame. You want a decision maker. And ideally, if you can meet with the president of the bank, and we've got some friends like that are in what I would call smaller regional footprints with high touch, white glove service. That's what you want. And it's not just about the rate. It's about who's going to be there when you need it, because that's part of the storm.
That's right.
That's right. Like, who am I going to call when the waves hit?
That's right.
Right. So, this is really good. And one other thing before we move on to kind of the tax side on this cash flow, it's like prior planning does prevent pitiful performance, right? And just knowing that you've got, in case, what am I going to do? It's like my son got hit with ice storm in Kentucky, and they were without power for days. Well, guess what? He had already, he was prepared, but now he's really prepared. So he's just not fretting. What am I going to do with my 4 kids and my wife? If the power goes out, he's got a generator and he's got backup fuel and he's got it ready. He was prepared before it hit, but now he's really prepared and maybe over-prepared, but I'd rather be over-prepared than all of a sudden scrambling,
Yeah, that's right.
And so back to the storm analogy, you want to make sure that you've got provisions in case the electricity is out.
That's right.
In case that you're on a well and you don't have electricity to get the well water, what are you going to do for water? You just need to be prepared. And so I think this is kind of a 101 thing, but we've seen it where people kind of blow past 101 and then all of a sudden they're in trouble.
Yep.
Do you have an example? And if you don't, that's fine. But do you have an example of someone that just got caught with their pants down and they were scrambling and made some bad decisions? Without using names.
Yeah, I think that the example of made, made bad decisions, probably the 07, 08 recession. I know it was a long time ago, but
Doesn't seem that long ago for me.
yeah, I know. I mean, that probably was one of the better examples of, it's not so much that people made bad decisions. It's just more like they didn't make any decisions and then got caught with their pants down. So in that time period, especially if you were in construction or something that actually was experiencing a downturn,
Yeah.
The first thing you did is you just said, okay, I've got a lot of cash on hand. I can survive this. I want to keep the team intact, because it's hard to find good people. Right. So
Right.
and it also sounds humane, like I want to keep the team intact. So if I had a big cushion, that's great. I have the ability to do that. If I didn't necessarily have a big cushion when I was making that decision, and for example, maybe I'd been investing in real estate on the side, so I had a bunch of debt on that, I'm
Right.
building my empire, all of a sudden it's like I've created an engine that requires a bunch of cash to keep the engine going. So, so then the first thing that happens is, okay, in the scenario of the guy that, couldn't keep the engine going, or needs a lot of cash flow, all of a sudden I've got a highly levered set of property. I don't have a ton of cash in my business, and the bank's looking at their loans and saying, hey, by the way, your real estate's lost 25% of its value.
Yeah.
We're going to need $1 million principal payment.
Yeah.
And we're pulling it from your company bank account tomorrow that's cross collateralized all this property. So like that actually is a real story that happened. The company ultimately declared bankruptcy and the guy has nothing. He was also a little bit scurrilous too. So you don't wish any ill will on anybody, but at the same time, it's like this, he wasn't the nicest guy on the planet, but even if he was, that's a guy that, just was running too thin. The other end of the spectrum is, the people that, had the cash reserve, didn't make any decisions, and just thought that the bank would always be there for them without ever actually talking to the bank. Same sort of problem, showed up where business is declining. I'm using all my cash reserves to pay payroll, keeping the team intact. And then I go to get my line of credit renewed, and I've got, $1 million of availability on my line of credit, thinking, yeah, I listened to your advice, Adam. I got my cash reserve built up. And the bank said, by the way, your new line of credit limit is $500,000. Right. Your line of credit is officially maxed. And you're like, wait a minute. Like I actually need that money. Like we saw a bunch of banking relationships flip, meaning like I was with bank A and now I'm with bank B because they ran me out, for those kind of very real reasons.
Yeah. I mean, I remember having my personal line cut in half during that period of time.
Yeah.
We had a guy that was on our board and was running a $52 million company. And all of a sudden his biggest client, before everything went down, they created their own internal manufacturing line. And so they went from 52 to 26 million. And they had already made it through the recession. So this is in 2011. Then guess what? The banks called the notes. And this guy and his partner had to put in $2 million a year to keep the thing going. I mean, that's pretty rough. And they had a really bona fide, legitimate business, but they hadn't planned on biggest competitor. They had concentration risk, really what happened. And it was kind of an adversarial relationship. They just weren't paying attention to it. Surely they won't do this. It was a multi-billion-dollar company. And they're like, yeah, screw you. We're going to go ahead and put in our own lines. And they did. And it was just disaster. And I asked my friend who was putting in $2 million himself. And I said, why don't you just flush this thing? Because he was in his mid to late 60s, worth a lot of money. He didn't need that headache. And he goes, Gary, I've got 250 families depending on me.
Mm-hmm.
Great guy. And, we were able to help turn it around. But then we did have to get to, like, they weren't bankable until we turned and got things in the numbers back. So, those are real things. And you did mention even exposure and leverage. When things are really good, and we saw that in the .com crash, and we saw it again in 07, 08, everybody was like, use leverage because it'll make, you'll make more money. What's the assumption? That things are going to connect, right? Yeah. That things keep going up, but what happens when they don't?
Right.
So I think, that's a really practical warning sign of, hey, the storm could come. What are you going to do?
Yeah. And we'll definitely get into like leverage rates and stuff like that later on, in the podcast episodes. But, punchline right here is, hey, don't, at least develop a bare minimum little war chest.
Yeah.
So you're not living in fear.
Hey, one other thing that before we leave this, are you going to talk about factoring, or even like sometimes people go into these hard money lenders that are paying exorbitant fees, but they have no other options. You don't want to get to that point if you don't have to, but anything that you would add on either of those topics?
Once it's like getting a loan from the mob, like how you ever going to get out of it, or, going into payday. It's the equivalent of payday lending, or I own the title of my car free and clear. I'm going to borrow money against it. It's one of those things. Like we have a running joke, and I mean, there are legitimate reasons to factor, but they're extremely rare. Factoring is typically the place to go before you die. So the general, I'm going to go to a factor, and then I'm going to stop paying my payroll taxes, and then I'm going to die. It's like the sequence of death that we see with people. So I think from that perspective, unless I'm a staffing company, that's dealing with blue chip companies, or I'm in a business where I'm dealing with blue chip customers that always have a track record of paying their bills. And so I'll give you a good example. So we have a client who one of their biggest customers is Anheuser-Busch. And when Anheuser-Busch comes to you and says, by the way, Gary, we're currently doing 10 million with you this year, and we're going to do 30 million with you next year. And at the same time, we're going to go from paying you in 90 days
120
to 120 days.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's hard to say no to that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's hard to finance that.
Yeah.
And in that particular case, you got Anheuser-Busch, they're going to pay, but you've got to figure out how to finance a lot of money real quick.
Yeah.
Those are cases where, okay, I could kind of see it making sense of isolating, even if it's like a specific customer, like Anheuser-Busch. It's when it's just like, that's the bank of last resort because I can't get anybody else to bank me. That's when it's like, I don't know, man. I mean, there's probably other stuff that you ought to be, meaning you probably are ignoring another thing in the business that you need to pay attention to so you can get yourself out of this relationship or not have to go there in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. We had a similar situation. It's always these big blue chips.
Mm-hmm.
With us, a big client was GE. It was the same thing. They would just squeeze us, and it just felt so unfair. But it's like, well, you going to play or you're not?
Right.
Because they've got other people in the stable.
Right. And
they know that. So it's very difficult. Thanks for teasing me on that one a little bit because it is a real deal. But you mentioned payroll. The temptation, we've seen it.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen guys that succumb to the temptation of, well, I've got this money reserve. It's for payroll taxes. I'll make sure that we cover it. It's like a day trader that gets behind.
Yeah, don't ever do that. That's the equivalent of the Reagan administration borrowing from the Social Security Trust Fund. Don't do it.
It's not going to be good. I mean, because the results, they have zero tolerance.
Right.
Like, you'll shut down and you'll go to jail. Like,
right.
So you talk about a storm, that's a typhoon.
Right.